Welcome to the Tyler's Place podcast, the official podcast of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, Southern Jurisdiction, Mother Supreme Council of the World. I am your host, Matt Bowers. Just recently, Brother Maynard Edwards had a chat with Brother Mike Smith, who is the host of the Short Talk Bulletin podcast. If you're not already acquainted with the Short Talk Bulletin podcast, here's a little bit of info on them, and I'm reading this directly from the website. Every month since 1923, the Masonic Service Association has published the Short Talk Bulletin, which was to be an informative, chatty discussion of some aspect of Freemasonry, symbols, allegories, history, individuals, etc. And considering this started in 1923, that gives you an idea of how many of these Short Talk Bulletins there are. Literally hundreds. So, needless to say, Brother Mike's had some assistance in putting together this podcast, mostly in the form of narration. And with that, you can now listen to the conversation between Brother Mike Smith and Brother Maynard Edwards.
I had never heard of the Short Talk Bulletins until I was I was the Tyler at Freeport Lodge. And there was a book of Short Talk Bulletins that was put together back in the 20s. And I had been producing audiobooks for several years. That's what I do. And I started reading and I thought, wow, this would make a great audiobook. And so in reaching out to the MSA, I discovered the vast body of work that is the Short Talk Bulletins. And one thing led to another. I started an online audio library for all the bulletins. But then I was talking to Maine's Grand Librarian, Ed King, and between us, we came up with the idea of the podcast because this was kind of right when podcasts were starting to get some traction. So that's how that worked out. And I've been putting out 2 episodes a week pretty much for the last 5 years. And we are now almost halfway through. Not quite. Got about 550 episodes out.
Wow. I was just going to ask you, how many episodes have you done total? Because there's a lot. The Short Talk Bulletins have been around since the earlier part of the 20th century, and they continue on one a month. And I think they might have missed a couple here or there during some of the war years, but generally speaking, they've been one of the most consistent Masonic publications out there in terms of availability and quality. And you've got quite a cache to choose from there. Exactly.
And I don't have to do any of the writing. That's really one of the best things, and, I recognize the value of what is written in them. I am by upbringing, I'm a preacher's kid, and I listen to my dad preach every week, for my entire growing up period. And so I recognize the value of the sermon, so to speak. And that's what the Short Talk Bulletins are. They are, if Freemasonry was a church, the Short Talks would be the sermons.
And I think that they're the good thing about them is that some of them are by Masonic scholars and have, nuts and bolts research in there, but some are the thoughts of a brother who sat down and really put his opinion on the page and shared. And it's really a good jumping off point and is one of the things I think that is important that we don't say out loud enough in Masonry, that someone's interpretation of the symbols is, whether you're talking Thomas Smith Webb or Albert Pike, or you're talking Mike or Maynard, it matters more what the individual's interpretation of it is and how they put that to work in their own life. And I like that there's room in the Short Talk Bulletins for that. And you've done a couple of really good ones in that regard that I've enjoyed. One I just listened to the other day, I don't know how old it was because I skip around. I forget what it was titled, but it talked about, the penalties. And I thought that was a really good one because the brother shared a lot of his opinions in there. And it really gave me a lot of times to think about how, I hadn't really considered these things before. So
exactly.
Now, how do you choose which one you're going to do? Are you because you're not going in order. You've moved around a little bit.
When I started this, I had the first 5 years, and I got through all of those. And I wrote to the MSA and I said, hey, can I get the rest of them? And I got basically a suitcase full of the pamphlets, 100 years of them almost. And I basically just reach in there and grab a few and see which one of the titles grabs me, and off we go.
I like that.
And, I've had quite a lot of cooperation. Some brothers from my lodge and lodges around Maine. The one that went out just the other day was, what was it? Anyway, the narrator was Brother Russ Charvonia, past Grandmaster of California.
Russ. Yeah, he's a great guy. Masonic Civility.
Yep, Masonic Civility. That's what. Yep, he's done quite a few for me, and is really good at it. He does it exactly the way I want it, as if he was reading in a lodge. Just introduce yourself and get to it, and then he sends me the file, and I edit it up in Pro Tools and put it out. So it's not really a podcast in that it's a conversation, but it's more like, a sermon, so to speak. But I've played quite a few of these in different lodges that I've been to, and people really appreciate it. They really appreciate the education piece of going to a lodge meeting. Give me something to think about, and it's worked out pretty well.
Well, and I've always enjoyed the concept of if you can take away from each lodge meeting, each valley meeting, kind of one good thing to sort of put in your own in your own head and your own heart. If you can take away one good idea from every meeting, then it was time well spent. I mean, Absolutely. We go into lodges, we have to pay the bills, we have to make new Masons. There's a certain amount of repetition involved with just the business of running a lodge and keeping a lodge building going. But if I can get one good idea out of it to enrich myself, then that has been worth it to deal with all the other stuff.
Yep. Well, and then there's the secret, which is the value of the fellowship that we experience when we go to a lodge meeting. We may not learn anything. We may not do anything other than experience the fellowship, and that in itself is worth it. A piece of education on top of that is even better.
Now, you were a little surprised when we asked you if you would jump on and talk with us about it, because we said we wanted to talk a little bit about you. And it was specifically because, you say, this is Brother Michael A. Smith, a voice for Freemasonry. And that's all we kind of know about you. We don't go list all of your titles and things like that, like a lot of us, the rest of us do. So I just was like, who is this guy? So that's why we brought, what is the reaction when you go out and are people putting two and two together? Because at this point, if Matt and I go somewhere, and I know if Robert Johnson goes places, people kind of know who we are, because we're all fairly shameless, and we do put all of our street cred on the end of our titles and things. But you don't do that. So are you invisible? Are you hiding out in public?
People around Maine know who I am. I will always give a business card when I go someplace, and on it says a Short Talk Bulletin podcast, and I just say I'm this guy. And they say, "Oh, you're that guy." My face isn't really anywhere. It's on the website, but I don't know. I'm not of the fame and fortune sort of school. Being a preacher's kid, I had the example of my dad who did all of this absolutely incredible writing and preaching, but it wasn't about him. And that's kind of been my approach. If I had done some of the writing, sure, I would take credit for it, but it's more about getting these words into the ears of anybody who's ready to hear. It's not about me. I appreciate your interest. Well,
yeah, because I can almost repeat it verbatim the way you say it. It's different every time.
Well, I use the same clip every.
Oh, is it? Okay.
I should probably change that up a little bit, shouldn't I?
No. I like it because it has. I think a brother once called it the process of entrainment. When you come into lodge and you sit down and you go through the whole opening ritual and everything, it kind of puts you in this state of mind in the same way that when you start a martial arts class, or I would imagine a yoga class, there's a specific set of steps that you go through before you start the learning process. And so when I hear that, I'm like, okay, I now need to focus in for 5 to 7 minutes.
Yep. I taught high school math for 17 years, and I didn't have something like that. When the kids came in, it was like, okay, sit your asses down. Come on. But this is more like, here's the end cap. This is what we're getting ready to do. My buddy, Eric Remschneider, who was a college roommate of mine, he did the cello the music at the beginning and the end. He came up to my house one day and we recorded it and I mixed it. And he gave me permission to use it. I've been paying him royalties on it a little bit, but he's been absolutely gracious about letting me use it. So yeah, putting one's head in that space is definitely is a good thing to start with.
The Masonic Service Association, not quite as visible as it has been in years past. They used to have full-time staff there and things, and now it's more of a part-time endeavor. It's supported by the Conference of Grand Masters. What has your relationship been with the MSA like? Because they still come. In my lodge, we still get the Short Talk Bulletin every month. I always look forward to getting it. So they're still very active, very busy gathering materials and publishing, and they've got all kinds of stuff available on their website. And I know they still do a lot of coordination for disaster relief in the United States. But what has your relationship been like with them? Because again, I don't know that a whole lot of Masons who don't have to deal with them on a routine basis or aren't in that professional Masonic space know much about the MSA.
No, they're not hugely visible. I mean, other than publishing the biggest Masonic publication that there is. I initially started conversations with George Bratz, who was the executive secretary back 6 years ago or so. I actually had not met any of them until this past summer in August. They were having their quarterly meeting in Chicago, and there were a couple other things going on for me in Chicago. So I drove out there and went to their quarterly meeting, and that's the first time I ever met them. They're great. They're great, awesome folks. They're hugely supportive of what I do, and ask, how can we help? Keep doing it, and they're great. The gentleman who was the executive secretary, Daryl Fremont, he just passed in December, kind of all of a sudden. And so the MSA is kind of scrambling now to get somebody to fill those shoes, because he was an enigma as far as how much he knew and all of the material that he was familiar with. And so they're doing well, but they're kind of in a stand back at the moment, just because they don't have the personnel that they used to. So I think they probably would have done what I'm doing eventually if they had thought of it. But I just happened to think of it first and just started doing it. So they said, sure, go ahead, keep doing it.
I love that you're a true Downeaster. You didn't even think about flying to Chicago from Maine. You drove.
I did. I drove. Well, I have friends in Erie, Pennsylvania, so I had to stop halfway.
Gotcha. Well, so when you pull these out and you start, do you have any favorites that stick out in your mind that have really left an impression on you? I'm trying to think of all the ones I've listened to. And like I said, the one that most recently was a discussion of our penalties, and I really enjoyed that one. And because it had a little bit of fact at the front end and then some other thoughts that the brother shared on the back end. But, what about you? Is there one that sticks out in your mind that still resonates with you?
Yeah. I initially recommend to new Master Masons the one called The Legend of Hiram Abiff, which was recorded by my buddy DJ Kantz, who is a past master over at my other lodge in Brunswick. I'm not going to go into the whole thing here, but it illuminates in the Legend of Hiram Abiff and why and how that relates to you and I, and how we can be thinking about that. All of them, well, not all of them, but most of them are written by people who really have something of high quality to say. And again, being a preacher's kid, I recognize that. And I recognize that the MSA never really put any of these out that were kind of ho-hum. All of them have some value. Some of them are a little more deep reaching than others, but every one of them is something that every Mason in the world can relate to at some point or another.
We actually use and direct people to some of your content for one of our courses on the Master Craftsman Online College, which is our online education platform. And one of the ones we do, it's open to any Master Mason, and I think that course is 99 cents. We keep it as cheap as possible, really, just to be able to pay for the website and stuff like that, which is not cheap. But the Supreme Council tries to. We're not in the business of making a profit off of it. We're just trying to keep the education going, and we use a couple of them, one on the lesser lights and one on the winding staircase. And there's another one we use, and that kind of walks everybody through the 3 degrees of Masonry, and gives them the beginnings of a Masonic study course. And the hope is that they will continue on and do some of the other courses and that are a little bit more involved. But it's been so I really appreciate you having things there for folks to direct to, and it's been we get a lot of really great feedback on it from our instance. Awesome. What's the direct feedback you're getting from brothers about it? I mean, do people say anything to you?
I really don't get much at all, except when I go into a lodge and somebody says, "Oh, I listened to that one and it was really good." But as far as feedback like that, I really don't get much. I post on Facebook every time I put a new episode out. Nobody comments on those. I'm encouraged by the fact that we just turned over 640,000 downloads of episodes.
Wow. That's great.
And so I know that it has traction, and I know that people are listening, and I know that it's definitely valuable. But to answer your question, no, I don't get much feedback at all. It's good to hear. Well, I'm glad you're getting feedback.
And I'm wondering if it's because, you, like I said, you don't, a lot of people will say nobody responds to me, nobody does, but as I spend my life in radio and TV and broadcasting, so I know that if you want a reaction, you have to ask, you have to say to people, drop us a line and give them that social permission to do it. So, and like I said, you don't do that. You say your name at the top and that's kind of it. But I bet you would get reaction if you ask, because I know that there are people out there listening, and people will send them to me every once in a while and say, "Hey, have you heard this one?" So it's definitely being absorbed and shared. So,
good.
What I have to ask everybody that comes on the show the same couple of questions, and the big one is always, so what brought you to Freemasonry? You mentioned you're a preacher's kid. Is there family history of Masonry?
My grandfather was a 58-year member of Hiram Lodge in South Portland, Maine.
Okay.
And after my dad passed in 2004 and I moved up here to Maine, my grandfather said to me, I was kind of struggling living here in the woods. And my grandfather said, "You should look into the Masons. They're a good outfit." And that's all he said. That is the entirety of what he said. And so I went and applied down in Freeport, and it's been history ever since. He was actually around for my 3rd degree. He was able to be there for it. And then he passed a few years after that. But so that's kind of what brought me in.
Now, have you done any work in in officer roles in the lodges?
Yes, I have gotten as far as senior deacon. I've been senior deacon for the last 3 years or so, and I'm pretty comfortable there. I know all the lines. I imagine I'll be moving up in my Brunswick lodge next year, but who knows?
Well, so the other thing that I enjoy is that occasionally you will have, because a lot of the short talk bulletins come from the earlier part of the 20th century. So the brethren, and I guess not brethren, more accurately, the brothers who wrote those are no longer with us. They've gone on to the Celestial Lodge, but you do every now and again have one that is more recent, and you'll have one of the guys who wrote the piece write it. One of my the past Grand Chaplain in Maryland, Brother Dave Sandy. I helped him do one for you, and that is it fun to work with the brothers when they're doing those kinds of things, or do you not really get to?
Getting a call out of the blue to celebrate something that you wrote, I don't know, a couple of years ago, is pretty awesome. And generally they've been nothing but happy to do it. They'll just send me a recording that they did on their iPhone or whatever, and I'll bring it into the studio and make it sound good. And it sounds like they're right there with me. I haven't done as many of those as I would like to, but whenever I take a handful out of the box, I'm like, okay, which one of these is probably still around? I have reached out to a couple who aren't still around, but There was one that I did a couple years ago, was written by a guy in New Zealand, and I wrote, around the corner through the Grand Lodges to his lodge, and the secretary got back to me and said that the brother was not able to do that anymore. He was in a home, but then the secretary volunteered to do the reading himself. So we got the whole New Zealand experience in that episode, and so that was pretty awesome.
I'm gonna have to look that one up. I don't think I've heard that one because, like I said, I kind of do. My approach to listening is almost like your approach to producing. I'll kind of flip through the list on Apple Podcasts and just hit one and kind of let it be random, and then listen to a couple of whatever comes up, because right. I like that randomness of it. If you're just doing everything in order all the time, I get bored with that real quick. Well, I mean, I want to ask you a little bit about what you do for a living. You record audiobooks for a living. That's a fun job. As somebody who's done a lot of voiceover in my time, how did you break into that? Did you come from broadcasting, or somebody said, "Hey, you got a nice voice"? And
nope, I taught high school math and music for 17 years, and I was on the south side of Chicago, but I had a bunch of kids who wanted to be musicians but weren't in the band, and they weren't in the choir, and they wanted to make modern music. So I wrote for a grant and assembled a recording studio after school. And so I worked with a bunch of kids, and that's how I learned how to do the recording. So after that, I went to a different school, stayed for a few years. They weren't really interested. But then I decided teaching high school I didn't really want to do that anymore. But since I already had the expertise and the equipment to do the recording, I started with audiobooks. And my dad had written a novel a couple of years before he passed, and so I started with that one. And so I started doing audiobooks. I did The Prophet. I did a bunch of public domain books, and then I started doing murder mysteries. There's a local Maine author here. I've done 13 books in his series. But then, while all that was going on, the whole Short Talk Bulletins book crossed my path, and then the whole interaction with the MSA happened, and then it kind of just branched off from there.
So were you originally from Chicago, or did you move to Chicago just for work? Or
I actually grew up in Connecticut, and I moved to Chicago to go to college. I went to North Park College, now North Park University, on the north side. They are connected with the church that my dad was a preacher in. And so after graduating college, I just got a job teaching high school, and stayed for another 17 years. And then Dad passed in 2004, so I moved back to Maine to be with the rest of the family, and I've been here ever since.
Well, Brother Mike, I appreciate you chatting with us. Is there I want to ask you what's next, but I think you're kind of content to keep on keeping on. It seems like you've found a groove.
It is definitely pretty groovy. And there's still a lot of work to do. I would like to get more voices involved. There's 300 or 400 of them that I have voiced so far, and I can only listen to myself just so much. So yeah, I would love to get more voices involved, especially the authors of the more recent ones. Yourself, if you would like to participate and read one or two, that would be awesome.
Would love to. I should mention too that I know I've had discussion about the Short Talk Bulletin podcast with one of the brothers who's on the Maryland Grand Line with me, Brother Gary Norman. He's our Grandmaster of Ceremonies this year, and he is blind, and he is a past master, and they made his guide dog an honorary past master. His dogs Bowie and Pilot are honorary past masters.
That's awesome.
And he's got a new dog now, Izzy, that goes with him to a lot of our Grand Line functions, and but he and I have had discussions about the vision, how great it is to have the resource that you're creating, because it's great for brothers who are visually impaired. Not much in terms of Masonic publication has been made available for brothers who are visually impaired, because and it's on a great day, Masonic publication, whether you're talking digital stuff like what you and I do versus hardback publication, there's no money to be made in it. So to to then say we're going to produce an extra one at even greater cost for brothers who are visually impaired, the cost of that is it is a difficult challenge to overcome. So having the resource that you're creating with that wealth of Masonic information, I know is appreciated by the visually impaired community. So thank you for the work you're doing for them.
The short talks were written in order to be delivered in lodge, vocally, mouth to ear. That's kind of the point. Reading them is fine. Listening to them is better. Having them delivered by a face who's 10 feet away from you is even better still. But yeah, it's a good way in, is through the ears.
Absolutely. And I can't thank you enough for giving us a little bit of time today, and for also for what you're doing to produce and preserve those wonderful little nuggets of Masonic knowledge that I've always enjoyed reading them. And then when you started producing them, I enjoy them just as much, if not even a little more, because I can do it in the car and no more wasted time. Right. I'm real random about it. I literally will swipe like I'm on The Price is Right, spinning the big wheel, and then hit one and go from there. If there's anything we can do for you, please don't hesitate to reach out. Consider us a resource, and obviously we're your brothers. But we thank you. And if you got something cool going on you want to talk about, don't be shy in hitting us up. We'd love to do it.
Absolutely.
Once again, big thanks to Brother Mike Smith for taking time out of his day to talk with Brother Maynard. If you would like to hear the podcasts from the Short Talk Bulletin, go to shorttalkbulletin.com or whatever other music and streaming services you use like Spotify and Amazon Music. If you want to hear more of Mike Smith's work in terms of audiobooks, go to Anaba, A-N-A-B-A Publishing in Audible and check out some of the books he's lent his voice to. So until next time, thank you for listening to the Tyler's Place Podcast, the official podcast of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, Southern Jurisdiction, Mother Supreme Council of the World. I am your host, Matt Bowers, and we'll see you next time.